George Washington, of course, was born in Virginia. As a youngster, I imagine President Washington knew very, very few Jews because there weren't too many living in rural Virginia. But later in life, first of all, when he was a young officer in the British Army during the French and Indian War, he dealt with Jewish merchants in Philadelphia. And when he was at Valley Forge, serving as commander-in-chief, he certainly knew Jews. There was a man by the name of David Salisbury Franks, who was an aide to George Washington. He met with him planning strategy, and that was at Valley Forge. There was a man by the name of Philip Moses Russell, who was a surgeon, a doctor at Valley Forge, and George Washington later wrote him a letter of recommendation. And perhaps when he came to Philadelphia and he would meet with leaders of the Continental Congress, it's possible, quite possible, that he met Chaim Solomon as well. As a matter of fact, if you ever go to Chicago on Wacker Drive near the Chicago River, there's a wonderful statue that depicts George Washington in the middle. On one side is Chaim Solomon, and the other side is Robert Morris, the superintendent of finances during the Revolutionary period. So George Washington never expressed any anti-Semitism whatsoever. And his most famous interaction with the Jewish community came in the year 1790 when he visited Newport, Rhode Island, and most likely visited the Touro Synagogue. And there you see a blank of Jessica of the Touro Synagogue. The Touro Synagogue is the oldest synagogue building in the United States. Not the oldest synagogue. The oldest synagogue is Shearith Israel in New York City. But the Touro Synagogue in Newport is the oldest synagogue building. It dates from 1763. It was designed by a famous Christian architect by the name of Peter Harrison. And a few years ago, my wife and I visited the island of Antigua in the West Indies, and we saw the town hall there was designed by the same man, Peter Harrison. And he refused to take any money for designing the synagogue because he said it's a house of God. So George Washington visited Newport. And the reason he visited Newport was because he was celebrating the fact that Rhode Island was the very last state of the original 13 to ratify the Constitution of the United States. And so George Washington went there to pay tribute to Rhode Island. And when he got to Newport, leading citizens of the community read out letters of praise to him and welcome to him. And amongst them was a man by the name of Moses Satius, who was the brother of Gershon Mendes Satius, the Chazan in Philadelphia, in New York City. And Mr. Satius welcomed George Washington. And George Washington, a few days later, wrote back a letter to the Jews of Newport, Rhode Island, thanking them for their kind greeting and for welcoming them to their city. And he gave in this letter one of the finest statements of religious liberty that was ever penned by anyone. It's a true document of American Jewish history, of American history in general, because it speaks about religious freedom. And I would just like to, I don't know if you can read it on the screen, but I would like to read to you a little bit of it. He wrote to Mr. Satius, "The citizens of the United States of America have a right to applaud themselves for having given to mankind examples of an enlightened and liberal policy, a policy worthy of imitation. All possess alike liberty of conscience and immunities of citizenship. It is now no longer that toleration is spoken of as if it was by the indulgence of one class of people then another enjoyed the exercise of their inherent natural rights. For happily the government of the United States, which gives to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance, only requires that they who live under its protection should demean themselves as good citizens in giving it on all occasions their effectual support."